course, the child goes to the teacher who will guide that child. What do you mean by external moral authority? You use that expression a lot. Materialism has to do with when you are Hello, it's a pleasure to have all of you back for this course in Values and Spirituality. Today we will be looking at a method to develop spirituality, and we are on page 35. We've just completed 10 aspects that Sister Denise took us through on the previous occasion. Sister Denise, welcome back. It's great to have you here.
Thank you very much.
You start off with a one-liner that sits rather deeply with me. You say the development of spirituality is inherently connected with meditation. What you are saying is that one cannot have one without the other?
That's absolutely right, because spirituality is to do with your inner world, and meditation is that which gives you access to the inner world in a coherent way.
That is so beautiful. So it's about access to within, to the world within.
Because our materialism, the materialistic culture we are in, everything is keeping us on the outside, so that it creates a block between us and ourselves. And so we need to get around that so that we can be within and develop our inner world, because that is where our spirituality lies, and it's from there that we come into the material world, which means that the spiritual dimension is dominant. Otherwise, our spirit is enslaved by material considerations, and then the self is a slave, and that is our problem.
The self is a slave. Yeah, that's it's uncomfortable even to hear you put it that way, and yet that is what we have become, looking at it from a spiritual perspective. The next line caught my attention because it highlights the conundrum that we're all caught in. You gradually come to terms with the paradox that on the one hand it is a spiritual truth that I am a pure soul, but on the other hand, the philosophical, religious, and cultural prevailing doctrines teach that I am a sinful soul.
This is something very important to work with, because out of these two statements, one of them has to be true. And it is the case that every person in the world has something or another on their conscience, which means you're not in the state of being a pure soul right now. But philosophically, what you are in your originality is what you are. What you have become is a deviation from what you are. And this is why spirituality says it is right to affirm I am a pure soul, and a pure soul of a good person, having lost power, has done negative actions. But this is not what your identity is.
You go on to say, this contradiction leads to inner confusion, which is deepened when your conscience is not clear. So the position that we are in is that I am a pure soul, eternally so, as you've put in a previous episode, but I have been committing sins. So this is what I have become. It's not what I originally am.
One is I've been committing sins, and the other is I've lost power. Two things. And the conscience isn't clear. So when you are trying to establish what is honestly true, the honest truth that you can come up with is what I have become is what I am. However, once you look at it from a philosophical angle, from the angle of eternity, then what you have become cannot be said to be what you are. You see, what you are is what you are originally and eternally. And that gives you clarity, that you're not going to identify yourself from how you feel, but from what you know.
In paragraph 2, you mention clarity in your first sentence, and then you refer the reader to the crisis of values. You say, one is the influence and preconceptions or myths of the prevailing culture, which subliminally sustain certain anti-values. And the second is the various hurts, violations, injustices, etc., experienced by people from childhood onwards, against which they react with retribution, righteous indignation, anger, revenge, bearing grudges for a long time, etc. Now, while the first part may not be easily accessible to people or easily understood, the second part of that sentence is something that almost everybody resonates with, because we have a deep memory of the negative experiences we've had, not necessarily just in this lifetime, but I think previous lifetimes.
Can be, yeah, can be.
Yeah. So tell us about this clash.
Two influences. There you are, under two influences. First of all, you're unclear who you are. One of the influences, which is the myths and preconceptions of the prevailing culture, these have been inculcated into you from early childhood, so that your belief system is created and imposed on you by one of the value systems that we have been talking about through this analysis. So that's one. The other influence, which subliminally affects you, is trauma experienced in childhood that you can't necessarily articulate, and that you're too young at the time to be able to recognize that this is not normal, this is a trauma, and it has wounded you.
Why do you call that a subliminal force? What is your reason?
Because you can't articulate it, you can't be conscious about it. It's sort of gone. Things that happen to you in early childhood go straight to the subconscious, and they drive your character, so that then you don't have access to controlling them through your consciousness. And therefore you are kind of driven by these two forces, and you're at a disadvantage because they're subliminal. So what happens when you develop yourself spiritually is you're causing these hidden subconscious elements to come to the surface, which may be quite unpleasant for you, but at least you know what they are, and then you know what you're dealing with. And then spiritual practice begins to supply you with tools that you then have to become skilled in the use of, so that you can actually take command of your consciousness from the inside, and also from the impact of the subconscious on your consciousness. So this puts you really at an advantage and makes you the master, where in so many other areas you would be driven by something that is out of your control.
The next line is something that many people will resonate with. We do not realize how strongly these forces color our perception and influence our thinking and behavior, because they are invisible. So the soul knows something is wrong, very wrong, but cannot articulate even to itself what is it that is wrong, when did it go wrong, and how to cure the wrong.
That's right, because you can't put your finger on it, you have no information, you're really at sea, and all the people around you have a tendency to tell you you're dreaming or you're imagining it. And so you feel very uncomfortable on the inside, and this is actually a tragedy, because it takes a pretty strong person, unless they've got good support, to get through this. And this is why I think it's so helpful to have a whole process, a whole system of education that says, we know what this is, we understand it's uncomfortable, and it's manageable, and here are some tools to get through it. So don't worry, this is survivable.
I have to ask you this. Did you write all of this in order to help people heal?
In many ways, I think you can't help people. But what you can do is inform people, and then I think it's up to the person to take advantage of it and help themselves. You know, there's this expression, God helps those who help themselves. I think it's a little bit like that. What I have the great advantage of is that I had gone through a very deep personal process right before writing this. So I was really writing from experience, that here is the depth to which circumstances may put you, and here is a way out. So it's a bit like a map.
A map, okay. The map goes further to say, meditation is the only known method that disconnects the consciousness from external influences and materialism in particular. You need to unpack this for us, because there's a depth to this message that's not easily apparent from the text.
Okay, external influences have to do with judgment. If a person is internally confused due to a deep trauma creating disturbance inside that person is not able to identify or put together or articulate, and they are not talking or acting according to how they've been programmed by the external society. So they get judged, they get condemned, they get told things about themselves that are completely untrue, because the external world looks at it in a certain way because they are ignorant, but they think that they're very knowledgeable. And so then that creates a lot of suffering in the young person. Now, with meditation, you're able to separate yourself from those influences and not take it personally, not take it in, and just be detached and say, okay, these people are welcome to their opinion, but they don't understand, and it's okay. I don't care whether they understand or not. Now, let me get on with exploration of this unknown territory, which is completely outside the range of these external people who are interpreting it their way. And what meditation will do, and the spiritual knowledge that is the foundation of meditation, is it will guide you and help you through that terrain, so that you can, you know, come back to yourself and come back to your sanity. Because some of this really makes you think like you're going crazy.
This section shows how meditation is integrated with intellectual, psychological, and philosophical paradigms. They undermine the limiting effect of linear thought processes and replace them with an inner geometry that is holistic and opens up the possibility for thinking about the eternal and invisible dimensions of human existence. That is very loaded. Sister Denise, could you please explain that to us?
You see, a person comes up against really a philosophical issue, an existential issue, and you don't really know how to come out of that difficulty. So what meditation will do is show you consciousness in a way that the conventional world hasn't been able to. So you see yourself as a soul. You see that you have been for eons of time as an eternal soul in a state of purity. then you see the impact of coming into matter, coming into interaction with people, in which you are affected by good and bad, success and failure, and so on. And the moral environment tells you good is like you're really good, and bad is you're really bad. Meditation and the associated spiritual knowledge tells you there is good and there is bad, and look at these two equally. And what you are is, in a very important way, you're beyond good and evil. And the conventional set of moral principles doesn't allow for that. And so it keeps you in a kind of internal prison, which is very, very uncomfortable. And from a spiritual angle, we would say that someone who doesn't understand these other dimensions is locked in a prison of ignorance. And so part of what we're trying to do is to let a person out into the wider arena, which says, you know, you can make yourself independent of these forces of right and wrong and the people who impose, you know, guilt feelings on you. Because the feeling of guilt is very debilitating, and it actually causes people to lose power and become unable to manage themselves. So, you know, while the moral ideas think that making somebody feel guilty is going to improve them, the reality is it disempowers them. And so a lot of these ideas are being re-looked at from a different angle. And I think you need to be very open-minded to be able to experiment with them. And then if you see that it is working and enabling you to come out of these limitations, then you give yourself permission to use them.
You go on to say, these modes of thinking and perception contain and neutralize the reactive, sense-perception-driven material values. It is only possible to cultivate values through this fundamental change in thought process and perception. What do you mean by this?
Linear thinking is very different from holistic, or sometimes you can call it circular thinking. And once you start to investigate the arena of spirituality, you begin to realize that linear thinking is not the only way. In the material environment, the materialist world, there is only linear thinking, and that's that. But once you start to look at the thought processes, the process of consciousness in a holistic way and in circular thinking, you go to a particular point that you want to understand, or an idea that you want to explore, and you move your mind around it. Along with that, you're not looking at good as being positive and desirable, and bad as being undesirable, that you feel guilty about and you've got to get rid of it and so on. But you become aware that a human being is like day and night. If there's only day and no night, it's not actually natural. I remember when I was in midsummer in Iceland, living for several days where there is no night. It really disturbs your system, because you become extremely aware of the importance of the light and the dark, the good and the bad. But our moralistic society says, no, we have to be all good and get rid of all the bad. But it's natural for a person to have their light and their dark side. So our attitude towards our light is neutral, as is our attitude towards our dark. And then you decide, okay, now within this combination of light and dark, how will I proceed from here? Because you want to be realistic, you want to be balanced, and you want to be free, you see. And this is how you proceed. It's a different way of looking at things.
When you mention freedom, freedom from what or who?
Freedom from external influences which are based in ideas that have been made up, but which don't correspond to the natural reality.
Sister Denise, through all of this, what becomes of an individual's pain? The reason I asked you earlier about healing is because as I hear you speak, what I glean from the words on the page and from your answers is that this is a method for healing. What happens then to an individual's pain?
You know, I think we have to be very careful of our terminology. When we start talking about healing and pain, we're kind of wandering into the medical domain. And it's very easy for the field of medicine and law to come over to us and say, you're not trained in medicine. And so this is why I really haven't put it like that. I like to use the word balance because if you think about nature, the way that nature operates is to bring things into balance. And even whenever things go out of balance, or whenever there's a huge natural calamity, for example, over a relatively short period of time, nature brings it all back into balance, and then it can run for a good amount of time. So I think what's happened to people is there's been a lot of trauma which has destroyed the balance, plus our these forces of the two kinds of values that I've been talking about, plus the trauma, creates very, very toxic circumstances for the spirit. And the spirit needs a map and a language and a way to come back to the original balance, which I think is also an expression of the perfection of the soul. And so all of these things are just ways to come back to that.
Thank you for what you've shared today.
Thank you.
Ask yourself whether there is something within meditation and spirituality that you could find to be of some help to you. Thank you, Sister Denise, once again.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us. I do hope to see you soon. Take care and goodbye.